Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly down a narrow hallway in a stone manor where the walls are sweating with candlelight and servants are pretending not to listen. The bridal chamber door has just been shut. Outside, a drunken crowd of nobles waits for proof, and not the symbolic kind. You're standing barefoot on a rush-covered floor, your heartbeat loud in your ears, your hands damp despite the cold. The bed's been made with the good linen, a pristine white sheet prepared to become courtroom evidence by dawn. A heavy pause fills the air. The moment everyone's been whispering about for weeks is finally here, and you're expected to bleed for honor. If this sleepy scroll through the past brought you peace, a like and a sub would mean a lot. Let me know where you're listening from, what time it is for you, and how your day went. Now, close your eyes, take a breath, and let's slip back into the hush of medieval scandal. You kneel on the edge of the bed, stiff and nervous. The man you just married, possibly much older, possibly a stranger, looks equally unsettled, or possibly drunk. This night isn't about love. It's about politics, inheritance, and honor. More than anything, it's about that damn white sheet. You've been trained, maybe even rehearsed. An older woman, your aunt or a midwife, or someone discreetly paid by your mother, has shown you how to tuck a folded scrap of lard with chicken blood where it counts. Just before the act, it has to be the right temperature. It has to burst at the right moment, not too early, not too late, and definitely not obvious. This is the torn sheet trick, and it's worked for centuries. Your reputation, your family's standing, your dowry, even your survival, hangs on this performance. Medieval Europe, especially in Catholic regions like France, Spain, and parts of Italy, placed everything on female chastity, not because it made you holier, but because it proved your father controlled his household. And if you don't bleed, you'd better hope your new husband is kind, or clueless, or both. Some women used thin glass capsules filled with sheep's blood. Others inserted bladders from animals, pig, goat, rabbit, filled with red dye or fluids, delicate enough to break, not enough to hurt. The trick was to make sure they didn't pop too soon. One misstep, and it's over. You're a fraud, a ruined woman, maybe sent home in shame, or worse. But here's the thing no one says out loud. Even real virgins didn't always bleed. The infamous hymen? It's not a cork. It can be naturally absent, thin, or already torn from horseback riding, climbing trees, or dancing too enthusiastically at midsummer. Historians still argue whether the medieval obsession with virgin blood was ever medically justified, or just a toxic combination of folklore, control, and wishful thinking. One woman from a 14th century Provençal village was dragged before the elders because her sheet came out clean. She swore she was a virgin. A midwife was summoned. The woman was prodded, questioned, sniffed, eventually cleared, but not before 3 days of shame and rumor. And the irony? Her husband had been with 3 prostitutes the week before. The double standard was not a bug, it was the feature. But for you, you've practiced, you know where the bundle goes. You've even figured out how to moan without sounding like you're reading a sermon. You lie back, breathe in, brace. And when it happens, when the moment hits, you gasp, tighten your fingers around the edge of the sheet, and shift your hips so the hidden packet bursts, just so. Afterward, as the room spins and your ears ring with panic, you slip the stained cloth into a more visible position. Tomorrow it will be displayed to family, maybe even carried out and waved at breakfast, depending on the customs in your region. Gross? Yeah, but also survival. And here's the twist. Sometimes he knows. The groom. He may even smile, say nothing and go along with it, because his reputation rides on this too. Because admitting you're not a virgin is one thing, but admitting you fooled him, that's worse. In a quiet study in Bavaria, a 15th century merchant wrote a private letter describing his first wife's wedding night. She was brave, he said. I think she had help. I did not ask. He adds, almost fondly, the sheet was enough. Let it be enough. Now, imagine you're her, lying awake that night, counting ceiling beams, wondering if your secret is safe. You listen to the wind claw at the shutters, the fire crackles. You think about your mother's instructions, her quiet fear, her tightened jaw as she handed you the stained rag she used for her own wedding. It worked for me, she whispered. Use it well. Sometimes, in poorer homes, families pre-bled the sheet before the wedding, pressing it with old blood or animal stains. It would be quickly shown and hidden again, never inspected too closely. After all, who wanted to question a joyful bride's honor? And here's the wildest part. In some areas, it became a literal business. Market women in southern France were known to sell ready-stained cloths to desperate brides. Assurance de l'honneur, they called it, an insurance of honor. One coin, one lie, one future, secured. There's even record of a noblewoman who stitched tiny thorns into her undergarment, not for protection, but to ensure that something bled no matter how the night went. That's not just commitment, that's a weaponized performance art. And yet, behind all the tricks, the powder, the props, the secrets, is fear. A deep, bone-deep fear of being found out, of being blamed, of being less. Virginity was currency, not morality, a stamped passport to legitimacy, not a sign of piety. That's why even queens, yes, queens, were known to fake the signs, especially when their throne depended on it. You roll over, your hand brushing the folded linen. It's done now. You wonder if it looked convincing, if he noticed, if he cared. You're not sure. But in the morning, when the sheet is held up to the sun and declared pure, you smile politely. Your mother exhales, the servants nod, and the world turns forward. Because tonight, you passed. You wake before the rooster crows, before the servants creak open the shutters, before the gossip takes its first sip of morning ale. The sheet is still there, drying by the hearth, stiffening in the warmth, a macabre little flag of victory. You wonder if anyone suspects, if the stain looks real enough, if it smells like iron or chicken. It's not polite to talk about what really happened, so no one does. Instead, the household begins its careful theater. A servant girl lays out your breakfast. Your new husband is off speaking to his steward. Someone prepares a tray to carry the sheet to your mother. Today is all about optics. And it wasn't just about bleeding. It was about proof. It had to be seen, carried, shown to witnesses, sometimes nailed to the wall like a relic, a bizarre badge of feminine honor or family pride, especially if money had changed hands. The blood-stained sheet was more than a dirty cloth. It was a receipt, a signed deal, a guarantee that your father hadn't cheated the groom by handing over used goods. Romantic, huh? So what if you didn't bleed? That's where the real medieval creativity kicks in. Because where biology failed, theater prevailed. Some women, like you, used capsules, the tiny, delicate things made from sheep gut, filled with red plant dye or goose blood. You'd keep it inside, close to the cervix, praying it didn't leak too early. Others used animal bladders, filled and tied with hair thread, wedged deep like a ticking scandal. Too squeamish? Don't worry, some preferred the herbal method. Oak gall, alum powder, and vinegar, a stinging rinse used to tighten the vaginal walls before the wedding night. Did it hurt? Yes. Did it help? Possibly. Was it recommended by midwives? Absolutely. They even sold virginity bundles in some marketplaces, discreet little satchels of drying herbs, rose water, crushed walnut skins, and powdered charcoal. A sniff, a rub, a prayer, and you were ready for your performance. And oh, don't forget the pigeons. Yes, pigeons. Certain recipes advised killing a young pigeon and collecting its blood warm, fresh, and untainted by male energy. Midwives would carefully squeeze it into a cloth, fold it in wool, and tuck it into the bride's linen bag. For later, a little gruesome, a little desperate, and yet totally normal in certain towns from Naples to Prague. Historians still argue whether such recipes were effective or just desperation dressed as science. Some claim they were placebo, others argue they had to work, because women kept using them generation after generation. One record from 1421 in a village near Rouen shows a mother paying a midwife not just for her services, but for silence. The bride was 15, the stain was achieved. The groom suspected nothing, or at least said nothing. And you know what's even darker? Some husbands preferred the pre-planned stain. It made things easier. No awkward moments, no whimpering girl. Just the illusion of conquest and purity, served like breakfast. In a few notorious cases, noble families even hired actors, literally, to serve as witnesses who could attest they saw the blood. A knight's daughter in Hungary, 1387, reportedly never even entered the bedchamber that night. But the next morning, 2 paid attendants brought the sheet out to the feasting table and proclaimed its glorious redness. The wedding alliance went through. Everyone cheered. No one asked questions. Because virginity at its core wasn't about the body, it was about the story. And oh, what a story it could be. Imagine the anxiety of those nights. You in your chemise, pacing, you rehearse the timing, you recheck the knot on your blood pouch, you whisper to yourself, don't move too fast, moan like she taught you, arch at the right moment. It's not seduction, it's survival theater. You're not just faking a moment, you're buying a future. And you're not alone. There are girls in Castile doing the same thing right now. One's using powdered pomegranate rind as a dye. Another's got a bit of blood-soaked sponge hidden in a pocket of her underdress. In Flanders, a baker's daughter is praying her borrowed linen looks convincing. In Aragon, a dowry's been doubled for a girl whose mother once fooled a count with red wine and a dash of flour. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some small alpine villages, red ink was used on wedding nights, sold in tiny ceramic vials with instructions for discreet use. Does not stain the fingers, one merchant promised, only the honor. Medieval advertising at its finest. But back to you. Your mother arrives mid-morning, carrying lavender-scented cloth to clean you up. She looks at the sheet. Her eyes dart to your face. She says nothing, just nods. You see the relief in her shoulders. She knows. She won't say it, but she knows. Later, your new husband gives a speech. He's smug, maybe even a little proud. You wonder if he suspects, if he felt the blood capsule burst, if he noticed how you clutched the sheet just so. But he doesn't ask. You don't tell. And so the lie becomes truth. The stain becomes a shield, and your future, land, money, children, standing, all grows from that one perfectly executed trick. You lay back on the feather-stuffed mattress that night, staring at the ceiling. A candle flickers beside you. You feel older, not from sex, not from marriage, but from the knowledge that your performance worked, that you played the game and won. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to realize something else. That power doesn't always look like a sword. Sometimes it looks like a carefully folded scrap of bloodied cloth, and a secret only you and your mother share. You're sore, not from what they expected, but from tension, from clenching, from staying perfectly still as you waited for the moment to pass, for the trick to work, for the stain to do its job. The morning is long gone now, and you sit quietly while the other women bustle around you, dressing you in fine wool and gold-trimmed sleeves. But you're not really paying attention, because today you're thinking about what happened before the wedding, when your aunt slipped you a pouch of dried herbs and whispered, in case you want to prepare. She meant tighten, clean, tone, that's what they called it, but really it was damage control. Because not all brides came untouched. Some were assaulted, others had lovers, some just made out with the wrong stable boy on the wrong spring night. The reasons didn't matter, the solution did. And that's how you found yourself in a stone-walled pantry 3 nights before your wedding, holding a cup of vinegar and alum while a no-nonsense midwife told you to hold it in for as long as you could stand. This is the quiet art of pre-wedding repair, not surgery, not magic, something in between. Half folk medicine, half whisper network, passed down from women to women like a secret second language. You weren't the only one. All across medieval Europe, brides, from peasants to princesses, learned these rituals. The tightening rinse might include oak bark, myrtle oil, or pomegranate rind. In Spain, there were recipes involving powdered mint leaves and clay. In Poland, they used wool soaked in red wine. In Sicily, it was sage steeped in goat's milk. Historians still argue whether these remedies had any real effect, or if they were just rituals of reassurance. But the truth is, for many girls, belief was half the cure. Because when you believed you were fixed, you could face that wedding night with less terror, with some kind of armor. And when the rinses weren't enough, there were plugs, rolled bits of linen soaked in vinegar or egg white, inserted hours before the wedding, meant to simulate tightness or friction. Yes, it sounds uncomfortable, because it was, but for a bride with a secret, discomfort was better than disgrace. Some accounts even mention thorn twigs, tiny ones, wrapped in cloth and placed carefully. The idea was that the twigs would scratch just enough to bleed when removed, creating evidence for the sheet without needing any further action. Painful, of course, but for some, it was the cleanest path forward. Then there were powders, sold in cloth sachets in town markets, marked with coded symbols like tiny crescents or veiled moons. You weren't supposed to know what they were for, but every girl knew. A little in warm water, a rinse, a tightening, maybe a prayer if you were the nervous type. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. In parts of what's now Romania, they believed that a special mushroom, dried, ground, and boiled, could reweave the gate. It was called Mireasa's friend, the bride's ally, smelled awful, cost a fortune, sold under the table in cloth bundles wrapped in sheep's wool. But these weren't just hacks, they were acts of resistance, rebellion even. Because the truth was, virginity wasn't purity, it was proof of ownership. A woman's body had to show signs of being unclaimed, unspoiled, untouched, even when that wasn't the truth. And the stakes were brutal. A bride found not intact could be returned, humiliated, even punished. In some villages, a man could sue for a refund. In others, he could beat her with church permission. In rare, horrific cases, women were put to trial, or worse. So of course there were repairs, of course there were tricks. And sometimes they worked so well, the groom never questioned it. In one case, a 15th century nobleman in Burgundy wrote to a friend, "I have taken her maidenhead," and she screamed. But the blood was strange, a smell of sour cherries. I think it was prepared, but I did not complain. The dowry was generous. That might sound absurd now, but it was survival back then, and sometimes it even became an industry. In Venice, there were bathhouse women, old, sharp-eyed matrons who offered restoration services. For a fee, they'd prepare a blend of herbs and oils, apply it in private, and offer instruction on how to present yourself as untouched. Some used tiny silk stitches, real physical closures, drawn through the outer folds of the vulva, temporary, fragile, but convincing enough for a clumsy, hurried wedding night. This practice was later echoed in Arabic medical texts and even in early gynecological manuscripts from Italy and Persia, though medical historians still debate whether such stitches were widespread or just theoretical. But let's pause and be human. Imagine you kneeling in front of one of those bathhouse women, lifting your skirts while she threads a needle. Her fingers smell like rosemary. Her voice is dry, patient. She doesn't judge. She's done this before. "Bite this," she says, handing you a strap of leather. You bite. And afterward, when she hands you a tiny jar of oil and says, "1 drop before he enters," you feel something strange. Not shame. Power. Because for the first time in days, you're not terrified, you're ready. The fake blood is prepped, the stitches are done, the herbs have been steeped and rinsed. Your body isn't a battleground anymore, it's a stage, and you've memorized your lines. That night, when your husband enters, you gasp like you're supposed to. You clutch the sheet, you architect, you even cry a little because you're exhausted and furious and numb. But he doesn't notice. Because the illusion is complete. And that's what wins. There's something strange about the smell of bathhouse steam. It's thick, a mix of wood smoke, rose water, and sweat. And it clings to your skin like secrets. You're sitting on a worn wooden bench, your knees pulled to your chest, the echoes of women's laughter bouncing around stone walls. There's a woman in the corner with a scar above her brow and a quiet, calculating gaze. She's not here to bathe, she's here to help. And you're here to disappear, just for a little while, to fix what shouldn't need fixing, to buy back a version of yourself that the world demands be real, whether it ever was or not. Welcome behind the bathhouse curtain, the warm, wet world where many medieval women bought back their virginity with whispers, herbs, and a few coins tucked into the hem of their shift. Public bathhouses in the medieval world weren't just for scrubbing. They were social hubs, trading posts, and for women, they were something more. Sanctuaries. Here, away from fathers and priests and grooms, women could speak openly, exchange recipes, tell the truth, carefully, and find the ones who could help. Because in every town, there was always someone who knew the tricks. In Avignon, for example, bath housekeepers were known to double as body workers. Not in the euphemistic sense, though yes, those existed too, but as real practical experts in female anatomy. Need a rinse that tightens? She has it. Need a powder to mix into wine that slows bleeding? It's in the cupboard. Need someone who won't ask questions when you say, I'm getting married in 3 days, and I need help? That's her specialty. These women didn't advertise. They didn't need to. Word spread in quiet glances and coded phrases, a hand on the wrist, a mention of my cousin who was in the same situation. You'd be directed to the back room where the real services took place, often over a bucket of steaming cloth and always behind closed doors. And they didn't come cheap. Restoration work, that's what they called it, could cost more than a month's wages for a servant girl. But what price would you put on a future? A good match? A life outside shame? Some bathhouses even had special herbs grown in rooftop gardens. One account from Lübeck mentions a plant called maiden's root, probably a nickname for myrrh or sweet flag, crushed and mixed with goat fat to be applied with a wooden stick, supposed to simulate that first-time sting. Was it medically effective? Historians still argue, but it was believed, and belief was everything. And here's something even stranger. Many of these women kept records, not public ones, of course, but little ledgers, notches on wood, tiny symbols scratched behind wash basins, not names, but cases, and in some towns the same bathhouse might quietly serve generations of women in the same noble family. A mother brings her daughter, a decade later, that daughter brings hers. A legacy of illusion. In one bathhouse in Florence, excavated centuries later, archaeologists found a hidden drawer behind a soapstone sink, filled with wax plugs, bits of blood-stained linen, and dried herbs wrapped in linen scraps. Was it medical waste? Maybe. Was it preparation material? Very possibly. But it paints a picture, one of women reclaiming control with whatever tools they had. And sometimes those tools were downright inventive. In parts of Bohemia, there were records of women using hollowed-out reeds filled with red-tinted starch paste. The tip would dissolve with body heat, ideally mid-act, releasing just enough fluid to stain the sheet, like a medieval ketchup packet, but more traumatic. And the bathhouse women, they'd show you exactly where to place it. They'd even coach you how to breathe, when to fake the pain, where to bite the pillow, and they'd remind you, gently, firmly, not to make eye contact afterward. Keep it hazy. Let him think he did something real. That's the most haunting part, isn't it? That you weren't trying to fool yourself. You were fooling the world and letting him feel powerful in the process. And not every girl came willingly. Sometimes they were dragged by their mothers, or bribed, or begged. Do this and you'll be saved, they were told. Do this and he won't send you back. And so they did it. Because in a world where your worth was stitched to your virtue, you did what you had to do to survive, even if it meant visiting the steam-filled chamber where women shared lies that smelled like lavender and vinegar. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. In some towns, especially along trade routes like Bruges or Genoa, bathhouse owners had menus, not printed of course, but memorized. You could ask for the Corsican blend if you wanted tightness, or the widow's wrap if you needed to mimic blood. Some women kept them as heirlooms, a sachet from their mother, a soapstone egg passed down like a talisman. And if you think this was just a peasant thing, think again. We have accounts of noble women, even royalty, quietly seeking these services. Queens don't get inspected, no, but they get talked about, and rumor in medieval Europe was as deadly as any blade. One Hungarian duchess, wedding a foreign prince, spent 3 days in a high-end bathhouse under the care of 2 midwives and a Greek herbalist. The final touch? A drop of lamb's blood placed on the inside of her thigh, just enough to smudge the sheets if things went poorly. It didn't. The prince never questioned, the alliance held. A generation of nobles was born from that night. And you? You're still seated on the wooden bench, arms wrapped around your knees, listening to the quiet splash of water and the murmur of old women who've seen everything. The woman with the scar meets your eyes and says nothing. She doesn't need to. You've come for what thousands of others came for. A clean slate, a believable lie, a way forward. You rise, dried and dressed, clutching the tiny cloth bundle tucked into your belt. You won't need to come back, unless something goes wrong. But it won't. Because tonight, you will bleed on command. You walk home from the bathhouse with the bundle tucked close to your skin, a warm pouch of trickery stitched into wool. The road is still damp from last night's rain, and somewhere behind you, two washerwomen gossip in low voices. You pull your hood down and keep walking. There's nothing left to prepare. Everything's in place. Well, almost everything. Because the real secret weapon isn't the herbs, or the blood, or even the sheet. It's her. The midwife. She's not here to deliver babies. Not tonight. She's here for you. She's the quiet witness, the fixer, the magician with the knowing eyes. She's helped more girls than she can count, and tonight she'll help you too. Welcome to the world of midwives, menders, and quiet winks, the unsung architects of medieval womanhood, who sewed, coached, and sometimes outright fabricated the appearance of purity. She arrives an hour before sundown, pretending to be there for women's matters. No one questions it. Midwives move through households like smoke, tolerated, respected, rarely interfered with. And this one's been in your family for years. She attended your birth. She once pulled a fishbone from your sister's throat. She knows everything and says nothing. And right now, she's boiling a mix of wormwood and rosewater in your fireplace. Not for cleansing, for scent. The nose tells stories, she says calmly, even when the eyes are fooled. You sit while she opens a small wooden box, its compartments filled with things you don't recognize. Dried herbs, twine, a lump of beeswax, something red, something sharp, something that looks suspiciously like a tiny blood bag, bound in silk thread. Standard, she says, seeing your stare. Don't worry, we've done this 100 times. And you believe her. Because midwives didn't just deliver children, they delivered reputations. They were part doctor, part psychologist, part performance coach. They knew the tricks of the body and the tricks of the stage. They could tighten with herbs, bleed with bladders, and stitch, yes, stitch, when needed. Some offered a 3-day package, tightening rinse, blood capsule, post-wedding inspection cleanup. Others were more artisanal. In northern Italy, there's a record of a midwife who used leeches to simulate swelling, just before the wedding night, supposed to create tenderness. The girl bled as expected, no one asked how. In England, one midwife created what she called the apple skin, a dried peel folded and oiled, used to mimic the feel of a hymen. She claimed she got the idea while pickling fruit. Historians still debate whether these methods were effective or just elaborate placebo, but records show something worked because women kept coming back, and because rumors about fake virgins haunted noble houses like hungry ghosts. In fact, one scandal in 1322 nearly ended a noble bloodline. A lady of the house, let's call her Isolde, married a powerful merchant's son. On the wedding night, the midwife prepared the usual trick, but the capsule broke too early. The groom suspected he sent her home in disgrace. A year later, she was married again, to someone wealthier. The same midwife handled the second wedding. This time, it worked. And Isolde, she became the grandmother of a bishop. The scandal, buried under robes and incense. Sometimes, though, things didn't go so smoothly. There's a record from a small German town, Rothenburg, 1468, of a midwife caught stitching a girl shut 2 days before her wedding. A jealous neighbor informed the priest. The girl was arrested, the midwife exiled, but the trial notes are illuminating. The girl confessed she'd had a lover. The midwife defended herself by saying, "It is better to sew than to bleed." The judge disagreed, but the court clerk wrote, "She did not lie, only delayed the truth." And here's your quirky tidbit. In some French cities, midwives who performed restorations wore special rings, flat with tiny symbols on the underside. A crescent moon meant tightening only. A star meant full restoration. It was never spoken of aloud, but if you knew, you knew. And they charged accordingly. A tightening rinse might cost a hen, a blood capsule, 3 florins, a stitch, 10, more if it had to be discreet. Midwives weren't cheap, but they were cheaper than scandal. Tonight, yours is staying just until dusk. She shows you how to walk without shifting the blood capsule, how to press your thigh at the right moment. She even brings you a rag, folded and lightly stained, just in case you need to accidentally leave it out in the open. I used it for your cousin, she says. Worked fine. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. Then she takes your hand. It's rough and warm and full of terrible wisdom. You'll be fine, she says. He'll never know. And if he does, he'll pretend he doesn't. That's the dirtiest truth of all. Because sometimes the groom was in on it. Not always, but sometimes, especially if the dowry was good or the bride was well connected. A fake virgin was still a virgin, as long as no one said otherwise. Medieval marriage wasn't about romance, it was about contracts, and like any contract, it came with loopholes. If the sheet was stained, the witnesses pleased, and the neighbors quiet. What more did you need? And midwives? They were the notaries of this unspoken agreement, the ones who made the impossible possible, with red dye and calm hands. You help her pack up her things. She leaves behind a small satchel of powder, just in case. She doesn't say what it's for. You don't ask. You both understand. Later, when the door closes and the fire dims, you sit on the edge of your bed, holding the silk capsule between your fingers. You press it once, just enough to feel the tension, just enough to know it's real. Like your future. Like your lie. Like your mother's before you. The hall is buzzing. Roasted meat steams on platters. Cups clink. The minstrel's half-tuned lute tinkles under a roar of laughter. And in the corner, far from the ruckus, behind a carved wooden screen, you sit stiffly on a narrow stool, clutching your hands and waiting for what might be the most mortifying moment of your life. Because tonight, they're gonna check. You've heard the whispers. You've seen it done. Once, when you were barely 12, hiding behind a curtain, the girl, newly married, was pale as chalk, while an older woman held up a crumpled white cloth like it was a holy relic. People cheered, someone even cried, and the girl? She looked like she might be sick. Welcome to the Virginity Inspection Parade, a ritual so absurd, so invasive, and yet so stubbornly institutional that it lingered through centuries of medieval marriage, especially among the powerful and the proud. And tonight, it's your turn. The wedding feast has reached its peak, which means the proof must be presented, not always physically, sometimes just mentioned, but in the more conservative regions, or among wealthier families with a point to prove. The ritual was literal. The sheet must be shown, and it had better be stained. In some cultures, the bride and groom would even be escorted to the chamber by friends or family, a twisted medieval form of peer pressure. Songs would be sung, doors bolted, food left on a tray, and outside, a crowd waiting for the signal. Somewhere in France, they call it la preuve. In parts of Italy, it's il segno. In England, they just say the token, but the meaning is the same. Tonight, a piece of bloodied linen becomes your final exam. You glance toward the servant carrying the folded sheet. She's the one who helped make the stain convincing. You gave her a coin, a nod, a silent plea. She carries it now with pride, as if it's the standard of a victorious army. And in a way, it is. In one corner, your new husband is sipping wine, laughing with his cousins. Does he know? Did he feel the difference? Did he guess the blood was warmed with a candle before you placed it? Or is he simply playing along? Historians still argue whether medieval men believed in virginity proof or just pretended to, a sort of shared delusion, part tradition, part performance. Some letters from the 13th and 14th centuries reveal husbands who seemed painfully sincere, others cynical. One German nobleman wrote, "I saw the stain and thanked God, though I had my doubts." He said nothing more. And you know what's even worse? Sometimes the inspection wasn't after the wedding night. Sometimes it came before. Conducted by a panel of women, yes, usually older, respectable matrons. But still, the girl would be laid on a table, legs spread, while a midwife confirmed the presence of a hymen, or something like one. If this sounds barbaric, it was. but it was also legal. In some towns like Krakow or Siena, bishops sanctioned it. In others, it was done quietly, unofficially, but just as devastating. And it wasn't just peasants. Even noble women weren't immune. Before royal marriages, especially cross-border alliances, inspections could be ordered by the groom's family. "We will not receive damaged goods," one count famously wrote in 1412. His bride was 16. She was examined, declared whole, and married 3 weeks later, still shaking. Sometimes the inspection came with a loophole. If no hymen was found, the girl could still be declared spiritually pure, provided no signs of misuse were detected. And who made that judgment? A midwife, or a priest, or, God help us, both? In some court cases, the testimony of an examining woman was considered legally binding. In one Flemish record, a bride was accused of fraud after her wedding night produced no blood. She insisted she was intact. The court ordered an exam. 3 matrons inspected her and declared her likely innocent. Her husband still sued. She lost. So you sit, waiting, and the procession begins. Your mother rises, smoothing her skirts. The servant steps forward. The cloth is unfolded. It looks convincing. Just enough smear. A reddish-brown stain near the center. The right kind of irregularity. Someone gasps, performatively. Someone else nods. The message has landed. She was chaste, your mother says quietly, with just enough pride to mask the fear behind her eyes. A few people clap. A cousin mutters a joke. The minstrel strums a triumphant chord. You don't hear it. Your ears are ringing. Because even though the moment passes, even though no one drags you away or hurls accusations or questions your worth, you still feel exposed, reduced, judged by a piece of linen and a handful of lies. And you're lucky, because in another region, say Navarre or Salzburg, they might have brought in a priest to pray over the sheet, or worse, brought in a magistrate. In some towns, a marriage without blood proof could be annulled within 24 hours, unless, of course, the husband knew beforehand and chose to forgive. A legal clause so vague it made hypocrisy practically policy. And here's a quirky, bone-dry little tidbit. In one Swiss canton, there was an actual linen register, a clerk whose job was to record the presentation of stained wedding sheets, numbered, signed, and kept in a locked chest at the church. Paperwork for your body. You watch as the servant refolds the cloth and hands it to your mother, who tucks it away in a chest like a treasured relic. It will be kept, sometimes for years, in case of disputes, as proof, as leverage. And when you rise from the stool, your knees aching, the air feels different. You've passed, but you didn't win. You didn't reclaim anything, you just survived. You step back into the hall, and the music rises around you. Somewhere behind the laughter and the bread and the wine, someone is already whispering. Were you loud enough? Did you blush? Did you seem believable? But that's not your problem anymore. The show is over, and the curtain has closed. You don't go to confession for lying, not this time, because in your mind and in the minds of thousands of women like you, what you did wasn't sin, it was survival. And anyway, who's really innocent here? The church says a virgin should be pure of body and soul, untouched by man, thought, or desire. But then the priest accepts your dowry, blesses the marriage, smiles at the wedding feast as the red-stained sheet is paraded like a sacred relic. He knows. You know. Everybody knows. No one says a word. Welcome to the confusing tightrope of what the church did and didn't know, where theology met folklore and virtue bent conveniently around politics, property, and priestly discretion. The truth is, medieval religion obsessed over virginity, but didn't always define it clearly. Was it physical, spiritual, behavioral, a technicality? Did God care more about your body or your intention? Ask 5 monks, get 6 answers. You're told your body is a temple, that virginity is holy, that it's your duty to enter marriage intact. But scroll through the confessional books of the time. Yes, they had manuals for priests, and you'll see the loopholes. One 13th century guide instructed confessors to ask how a girl lost her virginity. Was it consensual? A sin? Was she remorseful? Did she intend to deceive? And here's the kicker. If the woman confessed, showed true repentance, and swore not to deceive again, she could be absolved, even blessed for her return to spiritual purity. Spiritual virginity, a get-out-of-shame-free card. So what if you weren't a virgin, but acted like one in body and prayer? What if you told your priest, weeping, that you had sinned but were now reformed? Could you be considered pure again? Some said yes, some demanded penance, some shrugged. Historians still argue whether the spiritual loophole was widespread forgiveness or just priestly PR, a way to manage impossible standards without collapsing the whole system. But you know how it works in practice. A girl visits the priest 3 days before her wedding. She kneels, confesses, says she made a mistake. She didn't mean to sin, and the priest, perhaps with a sigh, absolves her. Maybe tells her to fast, maybe gives her a verse to repeat, and then he says, "Go in peace. God will see your new heart." She leaves. She bleeds a little on wedding night, or fakes it. No one asks. And technically, she's not lying. It's not about blood anymore. It's about belief. But the hypocrisy runs deeper. Because while the church preached chastity, it also brokered marriages, approved dowries, blessed alliances. In royal courts, bishops arranged weddings where the bride was 12 and the groom was 35. No one blinked. One abbot even wrote, "The virgin's flower must bloom in marriage." What that meant was flexible. There's a famous case, late 14th century, in the Burgundian court, where a young bride confessed she wasn't a virgin. Her marriage was already arranged. A scandal seemed imminent, but the local bishop issued a private letter declaring her redeemed through prayer and penance. The wedding went on, the sheet was shown, the bride bore 5 children, and the bishop got a new silver chalice. So, was she lying? Or was she, as the church later phrased it, restored through divine grace? Depends on your theology, or your budget. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some areas, especially in parts of Ireland and southern Germany, there were holy relics, yes, actual saintly body parts, that women could pray to for restored purity, not just for spiritual guidance, but for physical help. One shrine claimed their relic restored maidenhood to the penitent. How exactly? The texts are vague. But let's not forget the flip side. Women who confessed, told the truth, and weren't forgiven. A miller's daughter in 1450s Ghent was refused marriage rights after confessing she'd had a lover, even though the priest acknowledged she had shown deep regret. Her fiancé married someone else. The girl was later found in a nunnery, half mad, repeating prayers under her breath. So maybe you were right not to confess. Because confession, in this world, was not about cleansing, it was about strategy. And virginity? It was never just about what happened between your legs. It was what happened in other people's heads. Some theologians even wrote long treatises on the idea that Mary, the Virgin herself, could be a mother and still a virgin. The logic was tortured, the metaphors poetic. The conclusion? Purity was a state of mind. And that, in the end, is your greatest protection. You walk through the chapel a week after your wedding, the incense cloying and sweet. You kneel, pray, say nothing. The priest nods to you, a young man, newer, nervous. He calls you blessed among women. He doesn't know, or doesn't care, or knows and prefers not to know. Your mother stands at the back, head bowed. She doesn't look at you, but she knows too. She once told you the church sees what it wants to see. And maybe she was right. Because virginity in this world is not a fact. It's a decision, made by the men in charge, and whispered about forever by the women who know better. It's a week later and the bruises on your arms are fading, not from violence, but from clumsy hands and ceremonial expectations. The bed's no longer a battlefield. The blood-stained sheet is folded away. The talk has shifted to household matters, and yet, your performance still echoes in the marble-floored corridors. But tonight, the question is different. Not how you pulled it off, but why. Because beneath the whispers and the candle smoke, there's a deeper story. Not of shame, but of strategy. Of women who faked purity not just to avoid scandal, but to claim power, land, legacy, leverage. And in doing so, they didn't just protect themselves. They played the game better than anyone. Tonight, you walk in their footsteps. Welcome to the hidden world of fake virgins, real power moves, the noble women, royal brides, and cunning nuns who turned virtue into a weapon and walked the razor's edge between disgrace and domination. You see, once you realize the game is rigged, the next step is rigging it back. Take Blanche of Artois, queen, widow, and master manipulator. She'd been married once, bore a child, and was to be married again. Rumors swirled that she'd reclaimed her virginity using herbal methods before presenting herself to the Spanish court. No proof, just whispers. But her dowry was accepted, the alliance was made, and she went on to act as regent for her daughter, ruling lands in her name. Was she pure? No one dared ask. And what about Isabel of Bavaria, Queen of France in the 14th century? Her early letters mention a matron's assurance, likely code for a staged wedding night. She arrived at court amid scandal, and yet emerged untouched, on paper at least. She went on to influence politics, war, and fashion, while her husband, Charles VI, slipped deeper into madness. The virginity myth had done its job. She was untouchable. And then there's the darker side. The political marriages made in desperation, where noble girls were shipped off across continents, alone, afraid, armed only with a forged linen and the coaching of an experienced lady-in-waiting. One letter from a Danish courtier describes a foreign bride, modest and shy as all good virgins should be. But the same letter, never sent, found in a chest centuries later, reads, "She knew what she was doing. She controlled the pace. She winced at the right time. Her act was perfect." Perfect, because it had to be. Historians still argue whether this noble deception was common or exceptional. Were most noble brides virgins, or just trained? The records are vague, conveniently vague. But what's clear is that those who succeeded gained everything. You think about this now as you walk through your husband's garden, a place you now co-own. You run your fingers over the rosemary, the thyme, the rows of mint. You remember when your mother said, marriage is not about love, it's about access, position. She wasn't being cynical, she was being realistic. Because the system wasn't designed to protect you, it was designed to judge you. And if you played it well, you didn't just survive, you thrived. You've seen it already in the way the servants defer to you now, and how your husband lets you speak at dinner, how the steward asks for your seal when settling disputes. You were once just a body to inspect, now you're a name, a presence. And the foundation of it all? That one red-stained lie. Here's a detail you might enjoy. In some Italian city-states, especially Genoa and Florence, noble women were taught, literally schooled, in how to behave like a virgin. Walking, speaking, folding their hands in church. Some even practiced crying on command. It was called virtu theatrale, theatrical virtue, a rehearsed morality, fake it till you make it, or at least until your dowry was signed. And some women loved it, because it wasn't about being innocent, it was about controlling perception, owning the role, clutching the narrative like a dagger in a silk glove. You remember a cousin, Lady Isabella, who once whispered to you, "I faked everything, the gasp, the blood, the trembling. He never doubted, he looked so proud." She smiled when she said it, not bitter, triumphant. You didn't understand it then, but you do now. Because faking virginity wasn't just lying, it was resisting. It was turning the very structure meant to cage you into a ladder. And sometimes it even became currency. A known virgin could broker better marriages for her sisters, could leverage her reputation to manage estates, could argue her case in court with more credibility. A single lie, well executed, could echo through decades. Even convents knew this. Some abbesses were former noble brides who'd staged their way into purity, only to retreat into a cloister once widowed. Inside, they wrote rules, wielded power, even negotiated land deals. Their purity gave them voice. And the world never questioned it. Because once the lie settles, it calcifies, becomes legend, then tradition, then truth. So, what about you? You sit now in your chamber, a ledger in front of you. You're learning to balance estate accounts. Your husband has entrusted you with the harvest tallies. You dip your quill in ink, and with every careful line you write, you realize this is your power, bought with one perfectly arranged night, maintained with silence, strengthened every time someone says, "She's a true lady." You wonder, will your daughter need the same trick? Will she come to you, hands shaking, asking how to fake what the world expects? You hope not. But if she does, you'll show her, just like your mother showed you. Because women don't pass down fairy tales, they pass down survival manuals. And that's exactly what you've become. You sit at the window long after the household sleeps. The wind breathes through the shutters. Somewhere, a dog barks twice and then falls silent. On your lap rests a folded letter, smudged, worn, and never meant to survive. It isn't yours. Not exactly. You found it buried in your aunt's sewing box, tucked beneath a handkerchief that smells faintly of time and regret. The handwriting is tight, the ink faded, but the words strike like a blade. I did not bleed. He said nothing. I loved him for it, but I never forgave the silence. These are the closet confessions of noble brides, whispered across centuries, sealed in letters, tucked into journals, or slipped into the margins of prayer books, not because they were meant to be read, but because some truths demand witnesses, even silent ones. And tonight, you are one of them. Not every bride was afraid. Some were resigned, some were furious, some, strangely, triumphant. One letter from a 15th century lady in Aquitaine reads, "He did not look at me, only the sheet. I cried not for pain, but for how quickly the performance ended. There's no signature, just a pressed sprig of lavender, brittle with age." Another note, scrawled hastily in Latin on the back of a recipe, says, "My sister told me to scream once and then breathe through it. He was drunk. I did as I was told." These women were not saints, nor victims. They were survivors in silk and brocade, navigating a world where your value hinged on a single moment, a single reaction, a single drop. And sometimes they were honest, brutally so. In one surviving diary, a noble woman recounts how her mother paid off the midwife, her aunt arranged the proof, and her cousin instructed her in feigned cries. That's what no one ever talks about. The applause, the smug uncles, the smiling priests, the clapping hands congratulating you not for marriage, but for bleeding properly, the pressure to glow, to perform, to become the new jewel of the family, flawless, polished, and absolutely unmistakably pure. And what if you weren't? Then you wrote it down. On scraps of scraps, on the back of tapestry ledgers, in ciphered margins of psalters. In invisible ink made from lemon and milk, heat-activated secrets hidden in holy books. One girl, married off to a Spanish knight, wrote an invisible script between lines of Psalm 51. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and if not clean, at least clever." Historians still debate whether these snippets are literal or metaphor. Were they emotional confessions or literary flourishes? But the handwriting is real. The desperation bleeds through the ink. These were not characters. These were women who lived in the same world you walk now, with all its expectations and double standards. And what about the other half of the chamber? The husbands? Some were cruel, some were clueless, but a rare few, very rare, were kind. There's a particularly touching letter from an Italian merchant's daughter. I feared he would see the ruse. I had placed the cloth just so, but when he touched my hand afterward, he said only, "We begin again tomorrow." I loved him then. No drama, no accusations, just a quiet mercy, a decision not to look too closely, a kind of unspoken truce. And those too were acts of survival. Because sometimes the worst pain wasn't the bodies, it was the silence afterward, the not knowing, the wondering, did he believe me? Did I do it right? Will he tell someone? Will I be enough? One bride in Prague scribbled, "I fooled him, I think." He smiled, but I do not know if the smile was love or victory. And you've joined the lineage. You've played your part. You've stained the cloth. You've seen the smiles and felt the hush after the applause. You've earned the right to sit at this window and read these confessions as one of them. And perhaps, someday, you'll write your own. You think about where you'd hide it, not in your own sewing box, too obvious. Maybe between the pages of that devotional book you never read, or behind the loose stone near the hearth, or inside the hem of your daughter's future wedding dress. Because she'll need to know. That it's not just her, that It's never just one girl in one chamber with one trick and one terrible choice. It's a chain, a woven tapestry of half-truths and quiet alliances and barely suppressed laughter between women who know the game is rigged and play it anyway. And here's your quirky detail. In a monastery in Belgium, a single page of parchment was found, tucked between centuries-old choir music. On it, 3 lines of poetry in a young woman's hand. He saw the red and drank his wine. I kept my truth behind my spine and smiled like I was holy. No name, no context, just a sliver of humanity, raw, sharp, and real. You close the letter in your lap, fold it slowly, return it to the box. Then you rise, smooth your gown, and blow out the candle. Because the world is watching. And your secret? Your secret sleeps soundly, stitched in silence. He's standing by the fire with his hands clasped behind his back. His doublet hangs loose, comfortable now, at ease. The marriage has been consummated, the evidence has been shown, and the air between you has shifted from tension to something else. Not quite affection, not yet, but something easier, lighter. And here's the oddest thing. He hasn't mentioned the sheet once. Not the stain, not the ceremony, not even the performance you carefully delivered. Breath by breath, gasp by gasp, it's as though it didn't happen at all. Which makes you wonder, why do some husbands help? Not all, of course. Some husbands were harsh, suspicious, even violent, demanding proof, inspecting sheets, listening for screams, and punishing any whimper that didn't sound right. But others played along, smiled through the lie, sometimes even participated in the illusion. Not because they were kind, though sometimes they were, but because for a medieval man, virginity was political. And politics is often best served with silence. Take the case of the young Lord of Cornwall, married to a 15-year-old girl from a lesser house. She had no dowry worth singing about, but her brother commanded ships, and the alliance promised control of a key coastal port. The wedding night came and went. The sheet was clean. She was pale with fear. But the groom? He stained the sheet himself with red wine, laid it near the bed, waited a moment, then summoned the maid. No one questioned it. The family toasted, the union held, the port was secured, and the girl? She never forgot it. Years later, she wrote in her journal, "He covered my shame with a lie of his own. We became equals that night." Historians still argue whether such stories are isolated or common. Some dismiss them as romantic myths, crafted in later centuries to soften a brutal system. Others insist these quiet collaborations happen more often than we realize. Because not all men wanted the truth. Some wanted peace, reputation, or a wife who wouldn't hate them. Especially in arranged marriages, where love wasn't expected but cooperation was. And here's something darker. Some men had secrets of their own. There's a 14th century record of a nobleman who was unable to perform on his wedding night. The bride, knowing the stakes, smeared a bit of animal blood on the sheets before dawn. He never protested, in fact, he thanked her privately. The document reads, "The lady acted with grace and intelligence." The matter was not spoken of again. They stayed married 30 years. In these cases, silence was currency, and sometimes a kind of truce. You think about that as you glance at your husband across the room. He catches your eye, smiles, says, "The barley accounts came in. We're ahead this season. Nothing about blood, nothing about screams. Just barley." And somehow, that's a relief. You sip your wine. It tastes like apples and cloves, and you remember the moment, brief, breathless, when he paused during that first night, just for a second, as if waiting for you to react, as if checking whether you were afraid, whether this was real. You gasped, you turned your head, you let the capsule break. And he didn't press. He didn't ask questions. Was it mercy, strategy, or just detachment? You'll never know, but it worked. And here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Scandinavia, there were rituals where a husband would declare his wife's honor without the need for a bloody sheet. If he said she was as the moon before the sun, it meant untouched, pure, no further evidence needed, a spoken contract, binding. Of course, not every man was so poetic. In Flanders, some husbands paid midwives to fake the inspection, paid them to say the hymen was intact, even if it wasn't. The logic? Why risk shame when a coin could secure the illusion? Others simply didn't care. If she looked right, acted right, and the family was wealthy enough, why investigate? Virginity wasn't just a bodily state, it was a performance, one he could pretend to believe. And sometimes belief wasn't even required, just compliance. Like the merchant in Lubeck who wrote in his will, "My wife was clever on our wedding night. I always appreciated that." That's it, no scandal, no anger, just respect. You wonder if your husband will ever say something like that. Years from now, will he look at you and think, she tricked me well and I loved her for it? Or will he forget? Will it fade like old parchment until even you forget which part was real and which part was performed? That's the thing about lies that serve you well. They start to feel like truth. You rise, move to the hearth and sit beside him. He offers you a slice of pear. You take it. The candlelight paints flickering gold on the walls. You feel, for the first time in weeks, almost calm. Not safe, not yet. But seen? In the way he doesn't mention it. In the way he speaks to you like a partner. Like someone worth talking to about barley and bread and inheritance. He knows, you think. Maybe not everything, but something. And that's enough. Because tonight, you're not just the girl who faked her virginity. You're the wife, the manager of the household, the voice behind the estate accounts, the woman who made the system work for her, and married a man smart enough not to ask questions he didn't really want answered. You glance at the fireplace, where the ash still smells faintly of rose petals, left over from the ceremony. You smile. Because you made it through the hardest part. And the performance? It's still going. But now, it's yours. The bruises fade, the whispers die down, and the chamber door stays closed, not out of shame now, but routine. The performance has shifted. You no longer have to pretend to tremble or pause before undressing, and yet the role still fits snugly, like a gown tailored too tightly. Not painful, just always present. But something strange begins to happen in the weeks after the wedding. You notice things, little things. A woman's posture, the way she walks after her wedding, the glance she exchanges with the maid who cleaned her sheet, the tiny nod the midwife gives in the market. It's all part of a language, silent, coded, refined over generations. Because in some places, blood wasn't the goal. The performance didn't hinge on a stain, but on something subtler, a way of holding yourself, speaking, sitting, virginity as behavior, not evidence. And once you learn to see it, it's everywhere. In Florence, for example, among the merchant class, there were families who preferred no sheet at all, just discretion. They believed the true measure of chastity lay in how you moved the next day. Were your eyes cast down? Was your walk slow, as if sore? Did you speak softly or laugh too freely? The wrong posture could spark rumors faster than a clean linen ever could. In some Iberian regions, the body was less important than the appearance of submission. You didn't need to bleed. You just needed to act like someone who had been claimed. Walk gently, eat little, avoid eye contact for 3 days. If anyone asked, say, "I am resting," never say why. Historians still argue whether these post-performance rituals were meant to reinforce purity or to make up for its absence. A kind of social placebo, accepted by all because it was less messy than blood, less confrontational than proof. But among noble courts, the expectations could become absurdly theatrical. One French court document from the 15th century describes a bride who was trained to limp slightly after her wedding night, not because she needed to, but because the illusion was stronger that way. Her lady-in-waiting had prepared her like an actress for a role. The limp, the downcast eyes, the fragile smile, all rehearsed. And it worked. The dowry was doubled 2 years later when she bore a healthy son. Her limp, long gone by then, had served its purpose. You sit in your chamber and remember how your mother once said, "If you can't bleed, blush." Now you understand what she meant. Blushing was currency. It was cheaper than blood and often more believable. In some Slavic traditions, brides were expected to sit on a red cushion during breakfast, symbolic, not literal. The point wasn't to prove anything, but to behave as though it had been proven. If you looked the part, you were the part. And the irony? Even real virgins were coached to fake it better. One English bride, writing in the margin of a psalter, scribbled, "I feared I had done it wrong. I had bled, I had cried, but my sister said, 'You look too proud.'" Because sometimes even the truth had to be acted out. Here's your quirky tidbit. In certain villages of the Low Countries, girls were told to carry a small stone in their slipper during the post-wedding mass. It made their steps uneven, suggesting pain, suggesting proof. No blood, just a limp. The priest, the family, the neighbors, all satisfied. You wonder now how many of your friends, the ones who married before you, walked like that. You remember your cousin Emma, always glancing downward the week after her wedding, holding a hand to her lower back. You'd thought she was sore. Now you're not so sure. There's even evidence in the manuals of courtly etiquette. A bride should conduct herself modestly for 7 days after her marriage. Her voice should be gentle, her presence scarce, her words few. 7 days of staged modesty. That was the contract. And if you broke it? If you laughed too soon, walked too easily, smiled too widely, well, someone would talk, a servant, a cousin, the midwife. Rumors spread like fire through dry thatch. It was safer to fake shame than risk doubt. And so, even when you've passed the test, when the sheet is shown and the song is sung, the performance continues. In your posture, your pacing, your stillness, and how you cut your bread at the table, how you greet the steward, how you nod when someone says, "Such a modest young wife." And if you do bleed, if it is real, no one cares, not really. It's the story that matters, the impression. Because here's the truth, no one says out loud, blood fades, linen can be washed, but a reputation? That stays. And that's why you keep playing the part, why you move through the manor like someone who was conquered gently, not strategically. Why you smile when your husband says, "You've adjusted well." Because he's not just talking about the marriage. He's talking about the myth. The one you built, maintained, embodied. You sip your wine slowly, your back straight, a noble woman's posture, a bride's stillness. The kind that says, "Yes, I was pure. Of course I was. Look how I sit." And no one questions you. Not anymore. The trunk is heavy, iron-bound, and wrapped in 2 layers of wool. The key is small, more symbol than security, and tucked inside a pouch stitched into the hem of your underskirt. You only take it out when you're alone. Inside the trunk? Letters, herbs, a folded, faded piece of linen marked in a smear of dried pigment, a flask of red dye sealed with wax, and an object that almost doesn't seem real. 2 iron hinges, curved, thin, and unnervingly intimate. Tonight, we dive into one of the strangest, most debated, and most misunderstood relics of medieval obsession, the chastity belt. You've heard of them, everyone has. The idea is burned into popular imagination. Iron contraptions locked around a woman's body, enforced purity by padlock and pain. But the truth? Far more complicated. So, did women actually wear them? Historians still argue. Some say yes, at least occasionally, and primarily among the elite. Others insist they were mostly myth, cautionary tales, or fetishized fictions from later centuries, not standard practice in the medieval world. What's more likely is this: the idea of the chastity belt existed, it was whispered about, threatened, referenced in poems and sermons, and yes, in very rare cases, perhaps even used, briefly, symbolically, strategically. But the truth is far murkier than steel and leather. One 15th century manuscript from Tuscany describes a noble woman gifted a belt of modesty upon her betrothal, not to wear constantly, but to signal her status, her locked body, her family's watchfulness. Whether she ever wore it, the text doesn't say. Some surviving belts do exist, preserved in museums across Europe, but many have been proven to be 18th or 19th century inventions. Some were likely created as jokes, others erotic curiosities, a few perhaps instruments of medical restraint, repurposed and misinterpreted over time. But in your world, the medieval world, the chastity belt was more ghost than garment. It wasn't about protection, it was about pressure, a threat, a metaphor, a reminder that your body belonged to someone else and could be locked up, literally or figuratively, at a moment's notice. Still, some girls did wear belts. For travel, for show, for fear. There's one account from a French crusader who secured his wife before departing. Whether this was literal or just his way of saying, "I made her promise to stay faithful," we'll never know. But imagine it. Imagine being laced into iron by your husband before he sails away. Imagine the key around his neck, the ache, the humiliation, the silent panic, the quiet knowledge that this isn't about love, it's about control. And now, picture the trick. Because women, being women, found workarounds. In one legend, a noble bride was locked in such a belt before her husband left for war. Her maid, a former bathhouse worker, fashioned a duplicate key from candle wax and silver wire. When the husband returned months later, the belt was locked, untouched, and the bride was pregnant with a miracle child. Historians laugh about this one. They call it folklore, a bawdy tale meant to mock foolish husbands, but you can't help but admire her. Whether she existed or not, the story feels true. Because of course women found ways around it. Even the threat of a belt became a prompt for quiet rebellion. You've heard stories from maids who claim to know a trick, a way to mimic the weight of a belt with folds of cloth, just in case someone checked. Others would use perfume and wine to simulate the metallic scent on the skin. A performance within a performance. And here's your quirky tidbit. In Venice, a jeweler once crafted a gold chastity belt for a merchant's daughter. It had no locks, only hinges, entirely decorative, a wedding gift. He presented it as a joke, but the girl wore it for months, claiming it made her walk with dignity. Her sister later used it to press flowers. Not all belts were steel, not all were cruel. Some were symbols, pageantry, armor, and that's how you see it now. The belt in your trunk was never worn. It's not even full-sized, just a replica, handed down as part of your wedding trunk. A quiet threat, a warning, a joke that isn't funny. You run your fingers along its curve and feel a flicker of anger. Because even now, weeks into your marriage, with the blooded sheet folded and stored, with the performance long since past, this thing still lingers, not on your body, but in your memory, in the way people look at you, in the way you're expected to act. Chaste, quiet, compliant, as if some invisible belt still locks you shut. But here's the secret, you aren't locked anymore. You bled, or pretended to. You passed, or cheated. You earned your place. And now, the only key that matters is the one you keep hidden, tucked in the lining of your gown, a reminder, not of fear, but of how far you've come. You close the trunk, turn the key, slide it back into its pouch. The fire crackles, and you smile. Because virginity, it turns out, wasn't something you lost. It was something you outlived. You step quietly through the cloister, stone beneath your feet, silence pressing on all sides like a blanket soaked in cold. The bells haven't rung yet, but the sisters are already awake, moving like shadows between chapel and refectory. Incense lingers in the air. Candles flicker in sconces. Everything smells faintly of wax, old parchment, and something sharper, secrecy. Because not every woman who wore the veil did so out of piety. Some did it to escape, some did it to atone, and some did it to hide. Tonight, we step into a world rarely spoken of aloud, fake nuns and secret lovers, the women who entered the convent already spoiled, already skilled, already experienced, and who learned to navigate the rigid walls of chastity with loopholes, alliances, and occasionally lovers in the night. And it begins, as most of these stories do, with a girl in trouble. She's pregnant, or disgraced, or her family's tired of trying to sell her as a virgin. Maybe there's no dowry left, maybe she refused a match, maybe her eyes lingered too long on the wrong man's belt buckle. Whatever the reason, the solution is the veil. Put her in a habit, let the church restore her, lock away the shame behind stone and scripture. Only, not all convents were prisons, some were soft landings. Some were run by women who'd played the same game, who saw the desperation behind the girl's downcast eyes and offered not judgment, but guidance. There's a letter, unsigned, found pressed into a book of hours from the 14th century. I arrived with a belly full of sin and a mouth full of lies. The abbess only said, "Keep your hands busy and your voice low, you'll be fine." You picture it now, a young woman scrubbing altar floors with one hand while holding her belly with the other, wondering if she's been cursed or saved. Historians still argue whether these disgraced girls were rare exceptions or quietly common. Some convent records are suspiciously vague, names entered in the margins, notes like special entry or redeemed by silence. In one Italian convent, over 20% of the sisters had arrived under unclear circumstances, some pregnant, some widowed, some simply too beautiful to be trusted at home. And once they were in, not all gave up the world entirely. Because while convents required vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience, the enforcement of those vows was flexible, especially in wealthy abbeys. One particularly scandalous record from a German nunnery tells of a nun who maintained a correspondence and occasional midnight visits with a nobleman she'd known before the veil. When caught, she didn't deny it. She said simply, "He made me feel like I existed." She was reassigned, not punished, not excommunicated, just moved. Sometimes discretion trumped doctrine. And here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of France, particularly the south, there were whispers of lay sisters who served the convent without taking full vows, often young women from noble families who had failed to marry properly. They wore simpler habits, slept apart from the main dormitory, and sometimes bore children, quietly adopted by villagers in exchange for coin and favor. One abbess even kept a drawer of baby linens behind her writing desk. No one asked why. But the real twist? Some of these women were happy. Free from the demands of marriage, free from nightly inspections, free from the bloody sheet and the pressure to perform. They gardened, they painted, they read, they sang. And in some cases, they loved, quietly, dangerously, tenderly. There's a poem found in a 14th century manuscript, written in a novice's hand. "She kissed me through the chapel gate. At night when none could see. She called me saint and I believed. Until she stopped for me. Was it a confession, a lament, a joke? No one knows. But it's real. You pass beneath an archway now, your fingertips trailing the cool stone. A sister nods to you, her eyes calm, her mouth tight. You nod back. Maybe she knows your story. Maybe she has her own. Because virginity in the convent wasn't just expected, it was assumed. No one asked. You arrived, you prayed, you repented, you wore the habit, and suddenly you were holy. Never mind what came before. Never mind who whispered your name in the dark. And what about the church? Well, the church liked tidy stories. A noble girl goes astray, she confesses, she enters the convent, she becomes pure again. It's a miracle, it's PR, it's easier than dealing with scandal in the streets. One bishop in Avignon even wrote, "Better a veiled sinner than a defiant bride." And so, the gates opened and the girls arrived. And some of them, they never changed. They learned to nod at sermons and hide letters and hymnals, to cross themselves at dawn and meet a lover in the orchard after vespers, to keep their bodies cloaked and their minds very much alive. You think of them now as you kneel in the chapel, the candlelight trembling on the walls. You picture the girl to your left, innocent maybe, or maybe not. Maybe she's like you. Maybe she bled once, or twice, or not at all. And now, she's here, in wool and linen, singing prayers and tucking her real story behind her teeth. You breathe in, exhale, because this place, this quiet, orderly, holy place, is full of ghosts. Not of the dead, but of women who refuse to disappear. The veil is starched, your hands are folded, your mouth recites prayers that no longer mean quite what they used to. The convent bell tolls in the distance, but you're not in chapel this morning. You're sitting in a small wood-paneled office across from a woman wearing a ring of jet black stone, an abbess with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. She's not asking about your sins. She's asking about your family name. Because purity in these walls is negotiable, but bloodlines, that's the real business. Welcome to the world of veils, vows, and virginity trades, where noble families placed their problem daughters in convents, and the church quietly doctored reputations in exchange for land, gold, and long-term influence. It's less holy than it sounds. This abbess doesn't need to know whether you're a virgin. She already knows you're not. She likely read the letter your mother sent in advance, carefully phrased, full of euphemism. Our daughter seeks redemption. She is eager to serve. A fresh start for a young soul. Translation: she slipped, fix her, and the abbess will, for a price. Because this isn't some dirt-floored priory in the woods. This is a well-funded convent, one with its own vineyard, a library, a stone wall high enough to keep out curious men and inconvenient truths. One where noble families donate relics, and the church turns a blind eye to whispered rumors. As long as the gold keeps arriving and the girls look the part. And you? You do look the part. You're quiet, obedient. You know when to bow your head, when to wince at the word sin, when to murmur amen with the right amount of reverence. You've rehearsed this before. Only now your stage is a cloister. Here's the reality. Many noble families treated convents like political tools. If a daughter couldn't be married off due to scandal, illegitimacy, poor health, or lack of dowry, they simply purchased her redemption. It wasn't framed that way, of course. They called it donation, patronage, devotion. But behind the incense and the Latin, it was all about optics. There's a surviving contract from the 1300s detailing a nun's installment, 50 florins for entry, 12 bolts of linen, 1 prayer book, and assurance of virgin standing. That last part, not symbolic. It was explicitly required. The convent, in return, promised to defend the honor of the family name, even if the girl had arrived 5 months pregnant and bleeding from shame. And sometimes, the church played along with surprising flair. In Paris, one wealthy convent reportedly had a seamstress who specialized in reputation robes, extra layers of modesty, stitched with small symbols that suggested penitence, not scandal. The more embroidery, the more convincing the transformation. There's a quirky tidbit for you. In some Flemish convents, girls entering with questionable virtue were given swan feather cloaks, light, soft, and purely symbolic. They were told it was to protect them from drafts. Everyone knew it was for appearances. But what about the girls who didn't get the full rewrite? The ones who didn't arrive with letters and gold and land grants? They scrubbed floors. They slept in unheated chambers. They were reminded of their mistakes every day, sometimes with extra penance, sometimes with scorn. The redeemed virgins, meanwhile, were treated differently. They were praised for their conversion, given better food, allowed to write letters home, sometimes even sang solo during morning mass. Why? Because their families had paid for the illusion, and illusions, once purchased, must be maintained. But even inside these privileged cloisters, the game never really stopped. In one scandalous account from a Burgundian convent, 2 girls, both nobles, both restored, began secretly competing for the attention of the abbess's nephew, a priest who visited for quarterly sermons. One left him a pressed flower in his psalter, the other left a lock of hair beneath his cup. The abbess had them reassigned, quietly, firmly. But the records show she did not excommunicate them, because both girls had fathers who funded half her vineyard, and everyone, in the end, understood the rules. You glance down now at your own lap, hands folded, palms damp. The abbess is still watching you, measuring, not for piety, but for pliability. Can you sing? Can you read? Can you nod on cue and keep secrets? Good. Then you'll fit in fine. And what if you don't? Well, there's always the side chamber, the quiet cells for girls who break the script. But you won't be sent there. Because you've played this role before. The quiet bride, the gasping virgin, the innocent who stains the sheet and smiles sweetly when they raise their goblets in celebration. Now, your veil is your shield. And your silence? It's currency. The abbess stands, she hands you a set of beads. Not blessed, just polished. You'll begin with the novices, she says. And just like that, the contract is sealed. You are a nun now. Or at least, you're playing one. You're not the only one here. Not the only one with a secret. not the only one whose body tells a story that's been redacted, rewritten, edited with herbs and whispered prayers and midnight rinses. The convent is full of them, women who've knelt in chapel with empty wombs and full histories, who wear the same wool habit and the same look in their eyes. Someone who's been given a second chance. But not all of them were placed here by families. Some walked in on their own. Welcome to the quiet, desperate world of second chances at innocence, where widows, disgraced women, and those who lost everything tried to buy back respectability, sometimes with silence, sometimes with vows, and sometimes with powdered bark and a very specific prayer to St. Agnes. You don't need to be young to want a clean slate. And in the medieval world, for women especially, purity could be reapplied like powder, as long as you knew the formula. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. A widow whose husband died before consummation, who wanted to marry again, but not as used goods. She visits the bathhouse, applies the herbs, stitches a bit of dyed cloth to her undergarments, and practices a wince for the wedding night. Or the merchant's daughter who ran off with a lover, returned unmarried and pregnant, only to lose the child. Her family disowned her. She wandered for a season, then found a convent, not to join, just to watch. She listened, she learned. She bought a small satchel of red powder from a traveling apothecary. A year later, she married a blacksmith and no one ever asked about the past. These weren't teenagers caught in a moment of passion. These were grown women. Women with losses, with context, with history. And the world still demanded they behave as if nothing had ever touched them. Some went on pilgrimage, the medieval equivalent of a reset button. Not always for penance, often for rebranding. If you returned from a long enough walk with dusty sandals and a vision, people were willing to forget almost anything. There's a preserved letter from a woman in Cologne who writes, "They say I walked to Santiago for my sins. I walked because no one would marry me here. When I came back, they called me blessed. I did not correct them." Others tried magic. In Slavic regions, some women brewed teas of boiled moss and ash bark, believed to cool the womb and restore virginity, or at least simulate the symptoms of one. They'd mix it with ground eggshell and whisper a rhyme under their breath. "Bleed me once, blood anew, let no man know what I've been through." Was it superstition, science, self-delusion? Historians still debate, but the ritual mattered, because it gave them something to hold on to. In parts of Ireland, they rubbed sheep's tallow infused with sage and fennel around the thighs, supposedly to close the gate. In the eastern Alps, women used a paste of red clay and vinegar, applied internally, to stain the linen in advance. Some just prayed. Saint Agnes, virgin and martyr, became a favorite. So did Saint Marina, especially for those with unspoken sins. Convents even sold tiny relics, like bone chips or ribbons, blessed for purity, which could be tucked under a pillow on wedding night. It wasn't real redemption, but it looked like it, and that was enough. But not every second chance ended in marriage. Some women turned to performance instead. They joined mystery plays, donned white robes, and played holy virgins on public stages. The irony was thick. Former lovers of sailors and knights now cast as saints in town squares, mouthing lines about piety while children threw flowers. There's even a record of a former courtesan in Bruges who became famous for playing the Virgin Mary in Easter parades. She was beloved, admired, no one dared ask about her past. You think about all this as you sweep the convent cloister. Another woman, older, hunched, eyes like chipped glass, sweeps beside you. You've never spoken, but she leans in, low, and says, "Don't look so tense, you're not the first to arrive with a full cup." You glance at her. She smiles without teeth. "You'll learn," she says. "We all pretend, some better than others." Then she straightens and walks away, broom in hand, veil trailing like a shadow. That night, you find a small bundle beneath your cot, a folded cloth, a string of beads, a note that reads, simply, "Burn this before you wed again." It's not signed, it doesn't need to be. You're part of something now, a sisterhood of ghosts, women who erased their past with ink, blood, and determination, who found their way back into the fold not through miracles, but through method. And here's your quirky fact. In the city of Mainz, one abbess kept a secret book, a register of return. Each name entered had confessed to acts of bodily error, but had since completed the required prayers, pilgrimages, or herbal treatments to be considered restored. The entries weren't public. The church never acknowledged the book, but its existence? It was real. You've seen it. You were number 314. So tonight, you sleep with your hands folded and your secret sealed. Because tomorrow, the world will call you pure, and no one will argue. You hear the bells long before you see the cart. The clang is low, rhythmic, not holy, not musical, just metallic. A sound that says someone is coming, someone with news, or goods, or something far more precious. The convent gates creak open, and in rolls a wooden cart covered by worn linen. 2 figures sit atop it, one old, one younger, both dressed like traveling traders. But you know better. Their cart is filled with dried bundles, folded cloth, a dozen small jars sealed with wax, and one very specific wooden chest with a triple lock. This is no spice merchant. This is something rarer. A virginity fixer. Welcome to the underdocumented but very real world of traveling virginity merchants, women, and occasionally men, who crisscrossed medieval Europe carrying the tools of reinvention. They were surgeons, herbalists, midwives, smugglers, even frauds. They went by names like restorers, herb sisters, or redliners, and they were in high demand. You're told to help unload, a test, perhaps, or a gift. Either way, you pull aside the cloth and find the toolkit, tiny blood packets made from dried pig bladder, strips of dyed wool, needles threaded with silk, vinegar flasks, crushed oak bark, alum powder, and even hollowed reeds filled with some kind of reddish gum. Not everything is labeled. That's part of the trade. Each fixer had their own recipe, their own brand, and they guarded those secrets like treasure. The older woman sees your hands hover over a pouch of powder and smirks. "That one's for tightening," she says, or pretending you have. Then she winks. Depends how far gone you are. She's not being cruel, she's being practical. Because she's seen it all, girls who'd run off with soldiers, women returned by disappointed grooms, and even nuns who slipped once and needed to restore themselves before profession day. No judgment, just coin. These fixers didn't care if you sinned, they only cared if you paid. Some were skilled, like mobile surgeons. One operated in the Rhineland and was known for performing hymenoplasties, real ones, a crude, painful stitching of flesh to simulate virgin anatomy. She traveled with a page boy and a box of laudanum. Others offered illusions, safer, cheaper, easier to fake on a sweaty night under bad candlelight. There are even merchant guild records from Prague listing traveling body specialists who stopped at inns and bathhouses with coded menus, maiden's dew, lover's sigh, honor linen. And here's your quirky tidbit. In the region around Krakow, one such fixer was known to carry forged blood certificates, stamped parchment claiming that a girl had been examined and found intact by a matron of the church. They were never real, but for the right bride in the right town, they worked. You help carry the wooden chest into the convent storage room. One of the nuns locks it behind 2 doors. Only the abbess has the key. Later, you find a girl, barely 16, sitting by the cloister wall with red powder under her fingernails. She won't meet your eyes. You don't need her to. You know what she's done, or what she's about to do. And you don't judge her. How could you? This is the real economy of purity, one built not on truth, but on plausibility. Because families pay for guarantees, grooms demand symbols, and so fixers deliver. Their roots trace through Spain, Italy, Burgundy, Poland, always near monasteries, always near trade towns, always where desperate women live in silence. Sometimes they use herbs, sometimes surgery, sometimes raw performance coaching. There's even an account of one fixer who trained girls to moan properly, rehearsed gasps, staged flinches, even breathing exercises for a convincing bridal whimper. If it sounds theatrical, that's because it was. Virginity wasn't a condition, it was a show. And these traveling fixers, they were the directors. You remember a story the old abbess once told, whispered while mending robes. A girl once arrived with her hymen fully intact, she said, but she smiled too confidently on her wedding day. The groom sent her back anyway. That stuck with you. Because it wasn't about the truth, it was about performance. A trembling lip, a tear during prayers, a blood stain in the right corner of the sheet. Real or not, none of it mattered. So you begin to learn from the fixer. Not openly, not formally, but by watching, listening, asking the right questions. You learn how to wrap a false hymen in lamb fat so it melts on cue, how to use red wine and wool to pre-stain a sheet, how to make a tightening rinse that stings just enough to feel convincing. You also learn something else. This work saves lives. A girl with no stain, she could be sent home, or beaten, or locked in a convent against her will. But with a single drop of blood, fake, staged, or stolen, she becomes worthy again. You never thought you'd become a part of this world. But as you watch the cart roll out again at dusk, bells tolling in the distance, you realize you're not just a user of this system anymore. You're learning the tools, the craft, the lie, and maybe, one day, you'll be the one traveling, with a chest of secrets and a pouch of powder, saving girls one stain at a time. Because in this world, fake virgins save real futures. The merchant doesn't look dangerous. He's soft-spoken, round in the middle, his breath always tinged with honeyed wine. He wears respectable shoes, trimmed with fur, and carries a satchel that smells like dried basil and secrecy. He sets up his stall near the edge of town, near the well-traveled road. Not inside the market, but close enough to catch desperate eyes and whispered questions. He doesn't sell bread, or fabric, or soap. He sells solutions. And his best sellers, they're not for pain, or fever, or plague. They're for love, for control, for deception that works like magic. Tonight, you meet the ones who worked in the margins of medicine, herbalists, charm sellers, witches if the church got nervous, the creators of love potions and loopholes, blurred figures who danced between healing and illusion, between what was real and what worked well enough. Because sometimes when a woman needed to fake virginity, she also needed to win. It wasn't always about bleeding. Sometimes it was about getting the man to stop asking, to believe what he saw, to feel what she wanted him to feel. And for that, she turned to potion makers. In the hills of Provence, they brewed mixtures of wine steeped with crushed rosemary, ash bark, mint, and a touch of rue, said to make a man slow to judgment and fast to love. Drop it into his cup before the wedding. Smile. Let the herbs do their work. One recipe from the 13th century reads like a potion, and in a way, it is. Take the dust of wild thistle, crushed nutmeg, a pinch of the widow's herb, and mix in red wine. Serve at dusk. He will see you as he wishes, not as you are. Did it work? Who knows? But the belief in it, that worked plenty. Historians still debate whether these love drafts actually altered perception, or just gave the women enough courage to act convincing. Either way, they became part of the pre-wedding ritual in many towns. And love potions weren't the only tools on the table. Some sellers offered powders that tightened the body. Others, more creative, sold illusion kits, bundles containing a sponge, a dye tablet, a bit of sweet-smelling oil, and instructions on how to place it before the act, when to cry out, how to stain the linen just so. One kit found in a German merchant's ledger was titled The Maid's Last Hope. It included pig's blood sealed in a bladder, red clay paste, and a silver thimble. The seller's note? May your wedding be remembered, not questioned. But there's a deeper layer to all of this. Because these women, the ones buying powders and potions, weren't just trying to fake purity. They were trying to buy power, to level the playing field, to rewrite the story written for them by men, by priests, by fathers, to walk into a marriage with something, even if it was false, that gave them room to breathe. There's a story from Naples of a girl who'd been assaulted by a soldier. Her father arranged a marriage anyway. The merchant she visited sold her two things, a blood capsule and a courage draft, wine mixed with valerian and hawthorn, designed not to seduce but to numb. She used both. She bled. And she survived. No one ever knew. And here's your quirky tidbit. In Eastern Europe, There were reports of truth twisters, women who sold braided threads meant to be tied around the thigh during the wedding night. Each knot was a charm, meant to make the groom forget the question he was about to ask. Were they real? Of course not. Did they help? Women swore they did. Sometimes belief was all that mattered, and sometimes so was timing. One merchant of modesty in Paris sold candles said to make the husband clumsy, not enchanted, just slightly misshaped to burn unevenly, flickering wildly, distracting the eye during the act. It wasn't magic, it was misdirection, and it worked beautifully in a dim room with a nervous bride and a half-drunk groom. Because that's the trick, isn't it? Virginity was rarely examined. It was assumed. You just had to look the part, move the right way, cry out at the right moment. And sometimes, drug is wine, just a little. You think of all this as you stand beside the merchant's stall, watching him show a widow how to mix powdered beetroot with a touch of lye to create a convincing stain. She nods, pays, leaves. She looks relieved. Because even women with years of experience, even those returning to marriage after loss or scandal, still needed the illusion. The world demanded it, and these traveling alchemists, these loophole artisans, delivered. You never see them in the front pews. They don't lead prayers, they don't join feast days, but their fingerprints are everywhere, on the hem of wedding gowns, in the folds of bridal sheets, in the quiet sighs of women who made it through the night and into a better future. And you? You slip a coin into the merchant's hand. He gives you a vial the size of your thumb, scarlet sealed with wax. For the worst case, he says. You nod. You hope you'll never need it. But you tuck it away. Because in a world obsessed with the appearance of purity, a well-timed potion can mean the difference between ruin and freedom. The court is buzzing. A new noble woman has arrived, young, beautiful, and already the subject of too many whispers. Her gown is embroidered with tiny gold birds. Her sleeves fall like banners from her wrists, and her eyes scan the room like she's memorizing the exits. You know that look. It's not innocence. It's calculation. Tonight, we climb the marble steps into the candlelit chambers of the royal court, where virginity isn't just a private matter. It's a public asset, a political currency, a weapon when wielded correctly, and no one wielded it better than her. The scandal starts softly, like all great ones do. A raised eyebrow, a missing blood stain, a lady-in-waiting who drank too much wine and said too much to the wrong steward. And just like that, the performance begins to unravel. The bride, a cousin to the queen, married to a powerful marquis, had arrived with all the proper signs, the slow gait, the hushed voice, the folded hands during mass, the red ribbon tied discreetly beneath her hem. The court watched, approved, and nodded. But the morning after, the sheet stayed in the chamber. Whispers bloomed like mold on wet bread. Why was the proof not presented? Was it nerves? Or worse? And then, the explosion. One of her attendants, a cousin with a grudge and a tendency to talk, confessed to a chambermaid, said the blood had been painted, not spilled, said she'd seen the brush herself, red ochre mixed with goose fat, said the bride had practiced moaning into a pillow the night before the wedding. And just like that, the rumors burned through the court like spilled oil over a flame. You remember it all clearly, the silence at breakfast, the tight smiles, the queen tapping her goblet 3 times, her signal for fix this before it embarrasses me. And the bride? She did not flinch. She rose. She thanked the steward for the berries. She kissed her husband's cheek. She performed, even better than before. Because in places like this, a good lie can survive the truth, if you double down. Historians still argue whether this particular scandal was true, half-true, or carefully constructed, but the letters survive, the fallout survives, and so does the reputation of the bride, who went on to become one of the most powerful women at court. How? Because she controlled the narrative. When questioned by the queen's advisor, she said simply, "My virtue is known to God. Let those who doubt it speak to him." She wrapped herself in piety like a velvet cloak, began attending vespers, donated to the chapel, kissed the hem of the Virgin Mary statue before every meal, and within a month no one dared bring it up again. And the lady in waiting who spoke, sent to a rural estate, never heard from again. Because virginity at court was never just about the wedding night. It was about image control. It was how you spoke, how you walked, how well you could wield silence like a sword. Some women mastered it, like the Duchess of Lancaster, who was said to have borne 3 children before marriage, but entered court as a redeemed virgin. The church signed the certificate, the groom pretended to believe it, and when a visiting bishop questioned her, she simply offered him her ring finger and said, "Purity is a promise, not a fact." That bishop never returned. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the Burgundian court, there was a book of etiquette written just for noble brides. It included an entire chapter titled "On Carrying Yourself with Virgin Grace." No mention of blood, just posture, tone, and how to pause before answering a direct question. But sometimes, even the best trained stumble. You remember one poor girl, sweet, docile, married off at 15. She bled, screamed, did everything right. But the groom was cruel. He told the court she hadn't bled enough. He wanted a new wife. They sent for a midwife, an examination, a public declaration. The verdict? She had the sign of rupture. The marriage is valid. But her reputation never recovered. She spent her remaining years at the edge of banquets, praised for her embroidery, ignored by her husband. Because at court, truth doesn't matter. Perception is law. You think about that now as you walk through the corridor, the candlelight flickering on stone and silk. The scandal has faded. The bride in gold birds now runs 3 estates and serves on the Queen's inner council. She never confessed, never apologized, because she knew the golden rule. If the illusion is strong enough, the truth dies quietly. And the world? The world prefers its virgin silent and strategic. You're standing in a small village square, not a royal court, not a grand cloister, just a patch of earth stamped down by wooden shoes and goat hooves. But the tension in the air? It's thicker than incense on Easter morning. A wedding is happening today, and everyone is waiting for the same thing. The sheet? Because in places like this, small towns, tight mouths, and tighter traditions, virginity isn't a metaphor, it's evidence. It's a symbol passed from hand to hand, hung from windows, carried like a trophy. And if it doesn't appear, someone pays. Tonight, we descend into the most brutal and unforgiving arena of them all, village blood tests, where the difference between shame and survival could be a spoonful of animal blood or a single convincing scream. You've seen it before. The bride, barely 16, led to the marriage bed like a lamb. The neighbors already whispering, her mother clutching a linen cloth like a rosary. The groom nervous, or smug, or suspicious, sometimes all 3. And the next morning, a sheet is shown. Sometimes white, sometimes red, sometimes blank. And that's when it gets dangerous. Because unlike the nobility, there's no abbess to negotiate, no fixer with jars of pig's blood behind a velvet curtain, no convent to run to if the proof goes missing. In these villages, honor lives and dies in public. And the customs. Oh, they're elaborate. In parts of 14th century Spain, the mother-in-law would inspect the bed linen herself, then report back to the gathering with a raised hand or a nod. In some German territories, the sheet was paraded through town like a holy relic, accompanied by music, food, and far too much mead. And if there was no blood, let's just say that's when the goats got nervous. Historians still argue whether these rituals were enforced as strictly as described in legal codes, or whether they were more symbolic. But we know this. Enough women feared them to start faking the stain long before the guests had even uncorked the wine. How? Let's break it down. Some girls pricked their finger, simple, private, just enough to redden the cloth. Others used more theatrical methods. In one Czech village, a midwife reportedly sold modesty sachets, dried sheep, blood sewn into linen, tied with twine, tucked under the sheet. The bride would press it with her knee at just the right moment. And here's your quirky fact. In southern Italy, some brides would sneak a bit of cherry juice concentrate onto the linen, especially in regions where religious fasting prohibited meat before marriage. It looked real, bled well under heat, and even smelled holy, as one 15th century priest sarcastically noted. But not every bride got away with it. In one particularly cruel tale from Flanders, a girl was married off to a man 20 years older. She did not bleed because she had never had a hymen, a rare anatomical variation. The groom accused her of fraud. The town demanded she confess. She refused. They paraded her sheet anyway, blank, and she was sent to live alone on the edge of the village, not quite exiled, but not quite present either. She became known as the clean one, and no one ever married her again. That's the weight of it, isn't it? Not just virginity, but the performance of pain. You were expected to flinch, to cry, to stain the sheet. And if you didn't, you must have lied. That was the logic. But there were allies too. In some places, a smart mother, a quiet midwife, a sympathetic aunt who knew where to buy the right herbs or pluck the right chicken. Because yes, some women used chicken blood. They'd tuck it into a pouch under the mattress, press it, smear it, pray. You'd think someone would notice the difference. But people rarely question what they want to believe. And so the tradition lived on. Even today, some cultures still observe variations of this ritual. In parts of the Middle East, the wedding sheet is still hung on the family's balcony. In parts of Eastern Europe, the bride's mother still waits outside the door, listening for a cry. It's not medieval fiction. It's modern survival wrapped in lace and shame. You walk past the square again. The wedding is over. The guests are laughing. Someone sings an old drinking song, and there, fluttering in the breeze, hangs a small square of white linen with the faintest blush of red at the center. Convincing. Or real. Does it matter? The bride stands beside her groom, eyes lowered. She's won, at least for now. You wonder what she used. A pin, a packet, a prayer? You don't ask. Because in villages like this, the stain is a shield, a ticket, a story that's not questioned, only displayed. And tonight, she's safe. You're older now. The veil sits comfortably on your head, no longer itchy or symbolic, just fabric, just custom. You walk the cloister with slow steps, the way experienced nuns do, as if the air belongs to them. But inside, you still carry it, the knowledge, the muscle memory, the scent of vinegar, chalk, and rose oil. You carry everything. Because in this last stretch of the story, you're no longer the one asking questions. You're the one keeping the answers. Tonight, you're the listener, the confessor, the fixer. You're the one young girls glance toward when they fidget in their habits, when they flinch at the word purity, when they come to your door in the dim light of Compline, hands trembling with a question they can't quite say out loud. And you know what they want. Because you remember the feeling, the trembling uncertainty, the clock ticking louder in your mind than in the bell tower, the pressure of performance stitched into every inch of your body, the need not just to be innocent, but to look it, sound it, bleed it. You remember it all, and so you teach. Not openly, not with books, but in glances, in careful bundles, in whispered instructions passed with folded linens and prayers that double as codes. You show them how to stitch discreetly, where to place the wine-colored wool, what herbs to use when vinegar's too harsh, when to weep, when to laugh, when to say nothing at all. Because this isn't just tradition anymore. It's legacy. You've become part of the quiet lineage, the women who pass down knowledge in defiance of systems built to control them, the ones who knew that sometimes the only way to survive was to lie beautifully. And you've seen it work. The girl with the abusive father who faked her virginity to escape him. The woman who used red dye to convince a suspicious priest she was pure enough for marriage, and used that marriage to climb out of poverty. The convent cook who'd once fled a brothel and started over as a bride, thanks to a stitched sachet and the right kind of screaming. You helped all of them, and you didn't ask for thanks, because this was never about gratitude. It was about keeping women alive. Historians often sanitize this part. They talk about rituals, symbols, cultural pressures, but they forget the fear, the real raw terror of being found out, the consequences, sometimes deadly, of a stain gone missing. Even now, scholars argue over how common faked virginity really was. Some say it was rare, others say it was rampant, a shared secret among mothers and midwives, a rite of passage so well understood it barely needed explanation. You know where you stand. You've seen the stains stitched by trembling hands, the kits buried beneath floorboards, the girls who cried, not because they were in pain, but because their plan had worked. You've sat with them all. And you remember a particular night, a storm outside, thunder like splitting stone, a girl barely 13 shaking in the cloister hallway. She clutched a linen scrap soaked in red. "It's not mine," she whispered, "but he'll never know." You nodded, took it from her, folded it carefully. "Then it's yours now," you said. And it was, because truth in this world is not measured by accuracy. It's measured by survival. The world still demands stories about pure women, untouched, unsullied, silent, and when the story doesn't match the facts, the pressure is always on the woman to rewrite herself. So they do. With herbs, with blood, with courage. And with women like you, watchers, whisperers, quiet protectors. You look out the convent window now, the sky soft with dusk. Somewhere far off, a wedding bell rings, another girl stepping into a world of expectation and eyes. You hope she was taught well. You hope she has a friend. And if not, maybe she'll find one. You once did, and now you are one. The sky fades to a velvet blue. You sit by the window, the stone cool beneath your fingers, listening to the quiet tick of candle wax pooling into its dish. Everything has slowed. The bells have rung. The halls have emptied. Even the wind moves softly now, as if careful not to wake what rests. And you? You breathe. Deep, even, present. No more running, no more remembering, no more rehearsing the past in whispered phrases and tightened stitches. It's all here now. The whole strange, tangled history of how women survived a world that demanded their purity and doubted it in the same breath. And somehow, through the silence, it makes sense. You realize that all the powders, all the pressed flowers and pricked fingers and crimson stains were never lies. Not really. They were strategies. A woman's way of saying, I deserve to live. I deserve to move forward. I deserve not to be ruined for what can't be undone. The body may bruise, but it learns. It learns when to speak, when to hush, when to cry for effect, and when to cry alone. And it learns who to trust. You think of the hands that helped you, rough-knuckled, steady, some trembling with their own secrets. Midwives who taught with looks, merchants who sold illusions in velvet pouches, sisters who handed you stitched sachets with no explanation and no judgment. They are still with you, all of them. Even now, in this quiet hour. The world outside still turns. It still asks impossible things of women, to be soft and strong, untouched and wise, innocent and cunning. And yet, every day, they answer in their own language. A folded note under a mattress, a carefully tied ribbon, a breath held before a wedding bell. And tonight, you answer too. Not with words, but with stillness, with knowing, with peace. Let this be the hour you let it settle. Let it wash over you like warm water on tired feet. You are not alone. You never were. From convent walls to village doors, from royal courts to roadside wagons, women have been rewriting the rules in whispered ink and hidden stitches for centuries. And now that you know their stories, you can rest. You can close your eyes and sleep like someone who carries the truth, softly, safely, without needing to prove a thing. Good night, good night.